I knew I was being set up the moment I opened the quarterly folder and saw my own forecast, edited, padded, and polished like a corpse in a display casket. I didn't write those numbers. Hell, I wouldn't even think them. But there they were, tucked in a glossy PDF marked final, time-stamped 11:47 p.m., the night before the finance team's review call. No Excel sheet, no source doc, just a shiny little lie with my name stapled to the top. I stared at it for a long while, long enough for the glow of the screen to burn into my retinas like some kind of corporate stigmata. Trent's late night email just said, all set for tomorrow. You're our calm in the storm. Calm, right? That was his favorite euphemism for bulletproof target. Now, I've been at Thornwell Analytics for 8 years. I've survived 3 reorgs, 2 recessions, and 1 holiday party where the CFO got blackout drunk and tried to karaoke Bohemian Rhapsody with our largest client. I've sat in more war rooms than some generals. And through it all, my name was solid, trusted, quietly indispensable. I kept our books clean, our audits tidy, and our investors calm. That's probably why they wanted me to deliver the news this time, the kind of news that required a sacrificial lamb. By the way, before we go any further, let me just say, if this sounds like your kind of story, hit that subscribe button and toss us a like. I know 90% of y'all listen without subscribing. Yes, I see you, but it seriously helps the team keep unearthing stories like this one. Okay, back to the firestorm. It started small. I noticed I wasn't getting added to the weekly executive syncs anymore. Not officially cut, just mysteriously missed on invites. I'd walk by the conference room and see everyone inside, glazed eyes and performance dashboards flickering on the wall, while I stood there holding a coffee and a printout, like the office ghost of budget projections past. When I asked Trent about it, he gave me that weasel smile of his, the one where only his upper lip moves, and said, just optics, Sarah. You're not out, we're just streamlining visibility before investor season. He always talked like that, like a sentient LinkedIn post. But the real red flag, access lag, I'd put in a query and the system would stall. My permissions to backend report started timing out. I couldn't pull raw data anymore. IT said it was a system-wide glitch. The only system glitch was the one sitting in Trent's swivel chair trying to edge me out with a grin and a governance clause. Then came the late-night file. No warning, no collaboration. Just one email, one final PDF. And a note that said, don't worry. The narrative's been approved. You're the calm face they trust. Calm face. Funny thing about calm faces, they're the ones that hide the real work. The sleepless nights of triple-checking revenue accruals, the diplomacy of rephrasing were screwed into temporary underperformance, the 1,000 unseen fires put out with data and duct tape. And now that same face was being used like a PR shield. I didn't respond to Trent's email, didn't ask for the Excel file, didn't demand source data. I just printed the report, stapled it, slid it into my leather folio, and went to bed. Because I knew something he didn't. This wasn't my first fire. And I hadn't been idle these past 3 months, not even close. See, while Trent was cozying up to our new CFO and trimming heads like some smug gardener in a budget-cutting bonsai phase, I was having coffee chats with someone who did read Excel sheets, who did notice the cracks in our compliance walls, who had a poker face so cold it could refrigerate a server room. Marshall Dean, lead investor, Silent Hawk, owner of 26% of Thornwell voting shares, and for the last 10 weeks I'd been sending him internal audit notes, anonymously, at first, but that's another chapter. The night I received the doctored Q1 numbers was the same night I opened a fresh manila envelope in my home office. Inside, single sentence printed on crisp white paper. When the time comes, tell the truth. And I plan to, but not to them, to everyone. Trent closed the conference room door behind him like he was sealing a crypt, then leaned against it with that smug, used car salesman lean he must have practiced in front of his mirror every morning. We were alone. Just the two of us and a sleek black folder with a red tab that might as well have read. Scapegoat kit some assembly required. All right, Sarah, he said, flipping the folder open and spinning it toward me. You're going to be our sacrificial lamb for the investors. I didn't flinch, not even a blink. Just stared at him, waiting for the punchline. He grinned wider like he was proud of the metaphor. Don't give me that look. You've got the calm voice, the church lady poise, they'll swallow it coming from you. These projections, he tapped the spreadsheet like it was holy scripture. They're a little spicy, sure. But the narrative is controlled optimism. We need to paint a bridge, not a cliff. The numbers were trash. I knew it before he even slid them to me. Unaudited Q2 projections, cooked hotter than a 4th of July grill. Revenue was inflated based on pending contracts that hadn't even cleared legal. OPEX magically corrected itself without corresponding headcount cuts. It was lipstick on a pig, and Trent wanted me to parade it into the lion's den like I'd raised the damn thing myself. We both know the real numbers won't land for another 6 weeks, I said quietly, scanning the glossy, pre-approved lie. He shrugged. Which is why it's not technically a lie, it's a forecast, a directional expression of confidence. You mean a fantasy? Semantics, he said, smile unbothered. Look, investors get spooked by hard truths in soft markets. But if you tell them, if you walk in and say it's all under control, they'll nod and chew on it like it's gospel. You're the calm face. You always were. That phrase again, calm face. The phrase they weaponize when they want you to carry the dead body out of the building smiling. I stared at the spreadsheet, then at Trent. His shirt collar was unbuttoned, his tie gone altogether power casual, the kind of look men wear when they've already decided they won't be the ones bleeding out in a quarterly review. Why me? I asked not because I didn't know the answer, but because I wanted to hear him say it. Because if it blows up, he said, still grinning, you can take the hit. You're not gunning for a board seat, you don't have ambitions. You're safe, there it was. Safe. Translation, replaceable, soft-spoken, forgotten. What Trent didn't know was that behind my quiet routines and color-coded tabs, I had already mapped the whole damn minefield, and I was done disarming it for men who mistook silence for surrender. I gave him a small nod. No fight, no speech. Just enough eye contact to sell the illusion of loyalty. All right, I said, send me the talking points. He looked genuinely relieved. Atta girl, you'll knock it out of the park. I left the conference room with the black folder tucked under my arm, walked down the hallway past rows of glass offices, past coworkers who used to stop me for answers and now avoided eye contact like my presence was contagious. In the elevator, I didn't cry, didn't rage, just stood there while the floors ticked down, thinking about the irony of being handed a burning grenade and being thanked for it. But I wasn't going to drop it. No, I was going to carry it, right into the investor briefing. And I was going to tell the truth, not for them, for me. Because if they wanted a lamb, they should have picked someone without teeth. The investor conference room was colder than usual, not just in temperature, but in mood. The air had that tight metallic quality, like the minute before a storm breaks or the silence just before a firing squad is given the go-ahead. I walked in carrying the black folder like a waitress with a poisoned tray, heels echoing a little too loud on the polished concrete. Trent was nowhere in sight. Neither was the CFO. Just me. A 12-seat oval table, and a firing line of investor reps with eyebrows sharper than their pencils. And then, at the end of the table, there was Marshall Dean. He didn't wave, didn't nod, just watched. His hands were folded on the table like a judge at a sentencing hearing. He wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my car and hadn't moved a muscle since I entered. You could have mistaken him for carved stone if it weren't for those eyes. They tracked everything. Sarah Kepler, Senior Finance, one of the partners, announced. She's here to walk us through Q2 projections and liquidity guidance. I clicked the remote and the first slide lit up behind me. The numbers, the very ones Trent had handpicked like rotten fruit, glowed in red and green. My palms were slick. My voice, when it came, was steady. Not rehearsed, not embellished, just honest, as you'll see. The Q2 projections include revenue from pending contracts that are not yet finalized. Historically, Thornwell has recognized revenue post-legal review. This presentation reflects a departure from that norm. No one spoke, just scribbles. A few exchanged glances. Next slide. Operating costs have been revised downward due to projected staffing cuts. However, as of this report, no such reductions have occurred. Therefore, you're operating under an unapproved cost structure. A chair creaked. A throat cleared. Slide 3. Cash flow projections are tight, very tight. Our burn rate, as modeled here, doesn't account for delayed vendor payments initiated last quarter. If those vendors move to net 15 enforcement, our reserve coverage will lapse by mid-August. I kept going. No spin. No hopeful we're exploring options. Just data, truth. Kind that usually gets buried 3 layers deep behind buzzwords and pivot language. By the time I hit the last slide summary of risk factors, the room had shifted. Cold, clinical. No one smiled. A few scribbled harder. One man whispered something to his neighbor, who raised his eyebrow and stopped taking notes entirely. Marshall still hadn't moved. I clicked off the presentation, closed the folder, and said, that concludes the forecast. No one clapped. Of course not. This wasn't theater. This was a postmortem. One of the younger investors, barely 30, still reeking of MBA ink, leaned forward. These assumptions, did your executive team approve them? I looked him dead in the eye. They created them. He blinked. The silence that followed felt like the kind you get when someone realizes the house they're sitting in has a cracked foundation and the rain's coming in sideways. Thank you, Miss Kepler, one of the senior partners finally said, in a voice that had less gratitude than regret. I nodded, gathered my things, and walked out. Marshall was waiting in the hallway, still didn't smile, just extended a hand, big weathered. The kind of hand that had written billion-dollar checks and probably snapped a few necks, metaphorically speaking. I shook it, and that's when he leaned in. Just slightly, just enough so no one else could hear. It's time. That's all he said. He let go of my hand and turned, walking away without a backward glance. I stood there for a beat, adrenaline vibrating through every nerve, heart doing sprints in my chest. Not because I'd tanked a room, but because I hadn't, because I'd told them. And Marshall had watched. And now, for the first time in months, I wasn't walking back into the office wondering how they'd try to erase me next. I was wondering how I was going to use what I knew, because something had shifted. I wasn't the lamb anymore, not even close. By Monday morning, I was a ghost in my own inbox. It started small, innocuous even. My shared drive access timed out. Slack channels I'd used daily were now archived. My calendar, wiped clean like I'd never existed on this planet, let alone at Thornwell Analytics. By noon, it escalated. My VPN credentials failed. My finance software login returned a red error, insufficient permissions. I called IT. Jordan, the junior, stammered, I think there's been a flag on your account, maybe security protocol. Translation, someone upstairs flipped a switch. Then came the worst part, the one that still makes my stomach knot when I think about it. I walked into my office, my real, honest-to-God office, the one with the orchid I kept alive through 2 CFO transitions and a power outage, and found a printed document on my chair. Transition plan, S. Kepler unsigned. No timestamp, no context, just a list of handoff suggestions for a role I had not resigned from. Bullet points about account ownership, report assignments, and how to ease the transition of investor-facing materials. No sender name, no return address. It was the corporate equivalent of someone leaving a coffin-shaped cake on your desk and saying, "Don't worry, it's just a placeholder." I stared at it for a long time, my pulse slow and steady like a sniper's. Trent didn't call. CFO didn't text. HR said nothing. They wanted me to blink, to march upstairs, red-faced, and demand to know what was going on so they could say, "Sarah, you're overreacting. This is a miscommunication. You seem emotional." That was always the trap, so I didn't blink. I didn't even flinch. I took the paper, slid it into my drawer next to a granola bar and a stress ball shaped like a dollar sign, and sat down. And then I opened my personal laptop. It was already prepped. Weeks ago, I'd started compiling everything: access logs, invoice inconsistencies, bypassed approval chains, post-dated vendor entries. Every breadcrumb that showed how Trent and the CFO had systematically gutted our internal controls to juice the optics. Because they didn't just cook the books, they served them raw and smiling. I drafted the email slowly, deliberately, just one line in the body, as discussed. Here are the internal control breakdowns. Attached was a file, ICB Memo V3, PDF, a tight 6-page summary with cross-references, receipts, and flagged transactions. No adjectives, no emotion, just the math. The kind of thing that keeps investors up at night and SEC lawyers circling like vultures. I addressed it to one recipient, an external domain, Marshall's private counsel. Then I hit send. The second it left my outbox, I closed the laptop and folded my hands in my lap. Outside my glass office wall, people moved like nothing had happened, coffee in hand, earbuds in, talking about spreadsheets and lunch orders in Taylor's dumb fantasy football league. But I knew better. I wasn't part of the conversation anymore. They thought I'd been iced out, neutralized, a bureaucratic casualty. But isolation, I'd learned, is only a disadvantage if you need noise to think. And I'd never thought more clearly in my life. I sat there, still as stone, while my systems remained locked and my calendar stayed blank, and I waited. Because the clock had started ticking. And Trent didn't even know there was a fuse. 3 days after I sent the file, the silence changed shape. At first, it had been the quiet of exile, ignored emails, closed doors, nobody meeting my eyes in the break room. But now, it was the kind of silence you hear right before a courtroom verdict. Heavy, dense, the kind that hums in your bones. I felt it the moment I walked into the office that morning. Something in the air, too still, too curated, like the entire floor had been coached on how not to look at me. I passed Trent's office, door closed, lights off. Unusual for a man who enjoyed his own reflection in glass. Then I saw it, a printout, left on the copier face up like bait. Shareholder Agreement, Rev. 2019 underlined in blue ink. Clause 7.4c, I didn't need to read it. I already knew what it said. I'd read that clause 6 weeks ago while sipping bourbon in my living room, highlighter in one hand, legal pad in the other. In the event a lead investor executes their voting proxy due to executive misrepresentation, the investor reserves the right to appoint a temporary board representative until stability is restored. I never told Trent about it. He'd always bragged that governance was for the legal team, like understanding it would chip his masculinity. He didn't believe in fine print, just fine optics. Marshall, however, believed in both. That morning, he'd called in the clause, a quiet request through his legal counsel to review the original shareholder agreement. No announcements, no calendar invites, no boardroom theatrics, but in that one move, the game changed. I was walking back to my office, pulse steady, when my phone rang. Unknown number, not local, I answered. A clipped voice, "Miss Kepler? This is Emily Langston from Beck and Ritter. We represent investor proxy interests for Thornwell. Are you ready to brief the team?" I didn't answer. Not right away, because this wasn't a question. It was a formality. They already knew I was ready. I had my reports, my memos, my timeline of failures and cover-ups. They'd reviewed it, cross-referenced it. Vetted it with Marshall's internal audit team. This wasn't an if, it was a when, so I said nothing. Just breathed, slow and even. Emily continued, unfazed. "We'll be issuing a calendar hold. You'll be listed as interim advisor to proxy representation for the pending board session. Please don't respond to internal inquiries. Counsel will manage communication." Still, I didn't speak. I didn't need to, because I'd already done the talking. The numbers spoke louder than any monologue. The gaps, the manipulated approvals, the burn rate, smoke and mirrors, it was all there. And now someone with teeth had read it. When the call ended, I didn't celebrate, no smirk, no fist pump. I just opened my desk drawer, pulled out a fresh legal pad, and wrote at the top, action steps. Outline key fail points. Prep talking script. Organized timeline for proxy meeting. I wrote cleanly, neatly, under control. Trent and the CFO still thought they'd frozen me out. Still thought I was a liability contained, a PR hazard isolated to her glass box. But what they failed to grasp, and what Marshall understood instinctively, was that silence isn't surrender. Sometimes, silence is the sound strategy makes before it lands. And I wasn't part of the game anymore. I was the contingency plan. The morning of the shareholder session felt like standing in the lobby of a casino where everyone's betting with lives instead of chips. People were dressed too sharply, too early. There was a buzz, not the caffeine kind, but the kind that lives in rumors and poorly veiled dread. Trent was in full performance mode, pacing near the glass wall of the executive suite, rehearsing sound bites no one asked him to deliver. "We keep the tone light," he told the CFO, grinning like a man who'd just bought his own execution chair. "Marshall's coming for blood. Let's not give him a vein." They chuckled like high school boys bluffing their way through detention. Trent adjusted his cufflinks, then mock whispered, "If he tries to swing a proxy hammer, we play the transitional fog angle. No one likes abrupt changes during quarterly alignment." I stood 5 feet away, invisible. Not literally, but in their minds, I'd been filed underhandled. They thought I was waiting out a demotion or stewing in a corner office with no handles on the door. But my badge still scanned green. My email still received internal CCs. And I was still standing right there with a notebook in my hand and a pen I didn't need, watching Trent play dress-up in a room he was about to be evicted from. It was almost tragic. Almost. At 10:43 a.m., I got the invite. No sender name, no subject line, just an Outlook calendar ping. Governance briefing 15 min Suite 12C time, 11 o'clock a.m. location. Restricted level admin only Suite 12C was a dead zone, reserved for external governance liaisons. Last I checked, only outside counsel and regulatory officers even knew where it was. And yet, here it was on my screen addressed to me like it had been waiting the whole time. I walked there without hurry, took the back stairwell, avoided cameras, slipped past a janitor cart like a ghost passing through drywall. Inside Suite 12C, the light was dim and deliberate. No windows, just a long table, a leather folder, and a white envelope, no one else in sight. The envelope was already opened. Someone wanted me to read it, wanted me to see it with my own eyes. I pulled the document out, heart unbothered, fingers calm. One page, letterhead from Beck and Ritter, no excess. Just precision. Proxy appointee, S. Kepler, effective, immediately authority per clause 7.4c, shareholder agreement Thornwell Analytics, my name, in 16-point font. I stared at it long enough to make it real. Not interim, not temporary, not observer or liaison. Appointee, proxy authority. The kind of title that doesn't come with perks, it comes with purpose. It meant I wasn't just in the room, I was the vote, Marshall's vote. I placed the page back in the envelope, careful not to crease it. Then I left the room and walked calmly back toward the chaos. Trent passed me in the hallway 10 minutes later, still holding a printout, still humming to himself. He gave me that lazy, patronizing smirk that said, "You're still here?" I smiled back, just a little, nothing threatening, nothing loud, because I knew something he didn't. They'd left a chair empty at the board table for Marshall Dean. He wasn't the one sitting in it. The shareholder session was held in the executive conference wing, what Trent always called the cathedral. Floor-ceiling windows, water bottles arranged like fine glassware. That stupid Thornwell Analytics banner hung crooked behind the head table like a prayer flag from a dying religion. The room was full. Board members, investor reps, strategic partners, everyone who mattered and everyone who pretended to. The kind of room where power doesn't speak, it listens, and what it listens for is certainty. I stood near the back wall, unnoticed by most. Some glanced at me, but none lingered. To them, I was a leftover. The finance relic from quarterly decks. Background noise in a power play they thought was between Trent, the CFO, and Marshall Dean. Let them think that. At precisely 9 o'clock a.m., Marshall entered. He didn't do the usual glad handing. No forced smiles. No small talk about golf swings or fiscal alignment. He walked like the meeting already belonged to him. And in a way, it did. Trent stood near the front, flanked by the CFO and the external PR guy they hired last quarter. He stepped forward with that showman's lilt in his voice, clearing his throat. "Mr. Dean, we're pleased to." Marshall raised a hand. Trent stopped mid-sentence like someone had hit the mute button. Marshall turned to face the room. "I'll be brief," he said. "Per the proxy authority filed this morning, we'll be voting through our appointee." There it was, simple, clean, devastating. A pause swept through the room, soft at first, then tightening like a vacuum seal. One of the older board members leaned forward. "I'm sorry, you're what?" Marshall didn't repeat himself. He just turned his head, slowly and pointed, at me. You could hear necks snapping as chairs swiveled, heads turned. One partner muttered, "You've got to be kidding me." The CFO stiffened like someone had poured ice water down his spine. Trent's smirk died on his face, just froze. He looked at me like I'd walked through a wall, like the dead had risen and stolen his seat. I walked forward, no rush, no apology. The room parted like a wound. No one said a word. I took the open chair to Marshall's left, the one they'd been saving for him. The board secretary, bless her rattled heart, fumbled for the minute log. "We confirm name and title?" Marshall answered, Sarah Kepler, proxy appointee, full voting authority. I looked across the table at Trent. His mouth open, but no words came out. I opened the folder in front of me. Pages sat in neat rows, internal control breakdowns, burn rate anomalies, vendor inconsistencies. A presentation I hadn't been asked to prepare, but one I'd been waiting to deliver. Marshall leaned back, folded his arms, and nodded once. Showtime, but I didn't speak yet, because the silence in that room, it belonged to me now, and I wanted them to sit in it just a moment longer. Trent blinked like he'd just been slapped with a spreadsheet. I didn't stop walking. The conference table stretched long and silent, like a runway for reckoning. The seat beside Marshall sat empty, clean, untouched, prepped for someone with gravity. It had been waiting for a name that no one in this room had guessed would be mine. I pulled the chair out, sat down with quiet precision, and placed my leather folio on the table like I was laying down a hand of cards no one had realized I was holding. The CEO, normally a man who filled silence with word salad and weak chuckles, just stared. His jaw twitched and he muttered, barely audible, he gave her his seat. Marshall didn't respond. He didn't have to. The room already understood. I unzipped the folio. 12 sheets, numbered, tabbed. Chronological, each one a bullet fired in slow motion. I didn't waste time with preamble. No clearing of my throat, no dramatic speeches. Just my voice measured level as I turned page 1. On April 4th, vendor payment authorization #2847 was approved without cross-departmental sign-off, in violation of SOP 3.1. The approval was digitally signed by Director Trent Haver. Page 2. On May 19th, revenue from contracts #701 and #702 were included in projected Q2 reports, despite both contracts being under legal review and unexecuted at the time. The decision to include them originated from a directive email sent by Director Haver at 10:42 p.m. the night prior to investor pre-read distribution. Page 3. On June 2nd, cost-saving report presented to this board excluded accrued vendor liabilities amounting to $1.47 million. The redacted liabilities appeared in the raw dataset but were omitted in the investor-facing document. The modification was approved by I looked up. Trent Haver. Trent's face was pale now, not angry, not indignant, just hollow. Like he'd fallen into the hole he'd dug and finally realized how deep it went. The CFO shifted in his seat, avoided my eyes. Marshall remained stone still, watching, measuring. One of the investors, a stern woman from the East Coast group, all cheekbones and silence, began nodding slowly. Not performatively, not dramatically, just a slow, deliberate rhythm of realization. Across the table, a board member leaned to his left and whispered something to the man beside him. The second man's expression didn't change, just gave the subtlest of nods. Raised 2 fingers, the universal signal for a sidebar. I kept going. Page after page, clean, precise, no venom, no theatrics, just facts laid bare, and every one of them led back to Trent. By page 9, the CEO rubbed his temples with both hands. By page 11, the room was still but tense, like someone had locked the oxygen valve and everyone was pretending they weren't gasping. At the final page, I closed the folio gently. Silence. Marshall finally spoke. This board will now recess for 10 minutes. The CEO nodded absently. 2 board members stood, their movements stiff like they'd aged 10 years in a single meeting. No one looked at Trent. I stayed seated, hands folded, face unreadable. I wasn't there to gloat. I wasn't there to grandstand. I was there to be, to occupy the space they'd never imagined me in. The seat they all thought would stay cold until a man filled it. But I wasn't just a stand-in. I was the correction. The boardroom was quiet when I arrived, just the low hum of the HVAC and the faint tick of the wall clock no one ever looked at. Sunlight spilled through the tall windows, hitting the table like a spotlight staged for the next act. It smelled like lemon cleaner and expensive mistakes. I walked to the far end, and there it was, my name, S. Kepler, interim advisor to lead investor, etched in brushed steel. Polished. Unapologetic, not a sticker, not a Sharpie on a tent card. A real nameplate screwed into the wood, permanent enough to say this seat belongs to someone now. Across the table, the space where Trent used to sit was empty. No nameplate, no laptop, not even a chair. I'd checked the company directory that morning. His name was gone from the org chart. His LinkedIn had updated, open to opportunities. The kind of euphemism people use when they're pretending the fire wasn't their fault. The transition hadn't made headlines. No press release. No mass email. Just one quiet HR bulletin titled, Realignment of Strategic Oversight. He got scrubbed like a stain they didn't want guests to see. I took my seat, unbuttoned my blazer, opened the binder that had been placed neatly in front of me, today's materials, annotated with sticky notes from Marshall's team. Pages marked Discuss with Sarah in blue ink. I flipped through them slowly, letting the silence settle. Outside the room, I heard voices approaching, the muffled shuffle of loafers and leather soles. Laughter, throat clears, the usual chorus of people pretending they're not late. Then the door opened, and there he was, Trent, not in a suit, no badge, just slacks and a collared shirt, sleeves rolled. The kind of outfit you wear when you're trying to blend in. His eyes scanned the room, landing on me, then dipping quickly to the nameplate. He froze for a second, then stepped to the side, and held the door open. For the board, one by one they filed in. Nods, half smiles, that businesslike rhythm of people who now recognize you as in the room, not an assistant, not a liability, not a last-minute fill-in, but someone who has earned the right to speak before the meeting starts. I didn't say a word to Trent, didn't need to. He stood by the door like an usher at a play he used to star in. As the last board member entered, he caught my eye. No smirk this time, no wink, just the hollow look of someone who'd miscalculated their own importance. I turned the page in my binder, didn't look up again, because the meeting hadn't started. I had, and they were late. Big thanks for watching, you sneaky seniors. Subscribe to keep the coffee pot brewing revenge. Your ex-colleagues won't know what hit 'em.